further, my original career path was in law enforcement. So I started off as an individual sales rep, and my measurement was based on number of dials a day and talk time, which I thought were crazy metrics for salespeople to be assigned to. And marketing, I had a love-hate relationship with marketers. They're very nice people, but what they were doing from a marketing standpoint back in 2010 was very limited. They were buying lists from companies. They were running events that were generating non-qualified people coming to booths. And then I was being handed this virtual phone book and saying, call through all of these leads and see if there's interest. Inherently, I knew there was something wrong with that. And so I had to find a way to generate my own pipeline outside of marketing's purview. And the way that I did that was by leveraging social media. I started really understanding how social networks can help me grow as a professional, not just in knowledge that I would gain because people were sharing insights, but how to identify, connect, and engage with other decision makers active on these platforms. And because of that, I became very successful as a salesperson. Because I was having a higher success rate of connecting with these decision makers than trying to interrupt their days by cold calling them or hoping that they would respond to an email. I made the switch to what I call the dark side when I got my very first marketing role. I say that in jest because I actually admire marketers now because I know the pain they deal with. And I got to get laser focused on how to not just implement a program for salespeople to leverage social media, but ultimately the measurement of how to measure pipeline and revenue from social activities. As I learned to perfect that, I had created something called Social Selling University, which became a education for other salespeople globally on the tactics and activities that they should be performing on social media. And because of that, I started gaining in notoriety because I was the only person at that time being as vocal as I was around salespeople using social. Up to that point, it was all a marketer's game. And I believe that anything marketing was doing to generate their stuff could be boiled down for an individual salesperson to be just as successful. I always shy away from saying that I created the term social selling. What I will say is that I feel highly confident that I was the original pioneer into the space. There may have been whispers. The word had been used, but never in the full context of what I believed it could be, which was how do salespeople use social media. Social selling was confused into e-commerce and a bunch of other things. I took it from an idea down to a B2B application of how do you leverage social media as a salesperson. I went to work for LinkedIn. I was part of the content and social strategy for the sales solutions division. I remember Sales Navigator when it was a sketch on a piece of paper. And I helped the go-to-market plan around social, the social launch of that product, which gave me a lot of insights around how LinkedIn views the sales audience. I moved through the company. I went from working in the B2B capacity to working with the consumer product, then to working with the corporate communications team where I ultimately ran social media for LinkedIn globally. And then left LinkedIn shortly after the acquisition was announced with Microsoft. Did some consulting for a little while, helping startups that really struggle with the idea of how do we build a content marketing plan? How do we tell our story as a company outside of the product itself? And that was very rewarding. And then Hootsuite came along and asked if I would be interested in working with them and their customers. And I'm a huge fan of Hootsuite. I believe that the biggest obstacle for sales professionals using social media is their lack of confidence on how to engage or how to use these platforms. That then manifests in many different ways, either non-participation or in some ways bad participation, where salespeople act like traditional salespeople on social media, which is never a good idea. I believe that social media should be used as a platform to educate your buyers in a way that makes them want to have conversations with you. It's not necessarily a sales platform. It is a value-adding platform. When you get an in-mail immediately after connecting with someone and they're trying to sell you something, your knee-jerk reaction is to disconnect. You don't want to you don't want that type of engagement. And so now that salesperson has lost you pretty much forever. And so I think the idea is salespeople need to understand how to build relationships before trying to sell anything. So I think one of the pillars of what I call within social selling framework is when you're trying to connect with and build your network strategically. It's in a salesperson's best interest to build their network with all these IT directors and decision makers. But how do you do that? You reach out to these these decision makers, and you say something along the lines of, fascinated with the things that you've shared. Maybe that person was mentioned in the news, and I want to connect with you just to follow your updates. It's a very low barrier of entry, and very inviting in many ways because it drives to the ego of the buyer, and it will help the salesperson become more educated on what's happening in that industry. Then you have the ability, once you're connected, to start building that relationship by engaging with their other social updates, sending, maybe adding value to them because you come across some insights or research that you think this buyer might be interested in, and you're constantly adding that value to the point where the buyer is saying, I would love to be involved in something like this, and that's when you're able to take it offline. I think it just comes down to training, as you mentioned. I think it's the idea of sales managers in some ways being held accountable to how their sales reps behave and teaching them the best practices. Sales managers are usually looking just at the pipeline and revenue numbers, but I also believe that sales managers, if they're good leaders, are amazing coaches to their teams. The next stage where we're finding the largest amount of traction is around how do we empower our sales organizations to become sharers of information. Because when we look at the activity of sales professionals, the idea of how do we get them started is just to build this habit of sharing and then feeding the sales teams the right content for them to share through their social networks. As that will grow, they will get more engagement. They'll want to invest more time into these networks. When I think about the future of social selling, at some point, social selling is just going to become sales because all of these activities will somehow be originating through social networks. I think what gets really interesting is when we start looking at the future technologies, artificial intelligence, these AI type tools that are helping with predictive analytics based on information you may own within your own CRM or what is being found through the larger social ecosystem and identifying these contacts for these sellers to actually get involved with.